I had been working at the Hawthorne estate for just under 3 months, and in all that time, I had never seen the tension between Edward and his fiancée, Valerie, as thick as it was that day. It started with a simple disagreement. Edward's mother, a frail woman who had been suffering from a chronic illness, was sitting in the living room, trying to get some rest. Valerie, as usual, was making her presence known, her voice high-pitched as she argued with Edward about an upcoming charity event. But something was different today. As I walked past the hallway, I caught the end of their argument, but what I didn't expect was to hear Valerie's harsh words aimed at Edward's mother. "She's nothing but a burden to you," Valerie spat, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's time you stop coddling her and let her go." Edward's mother, sitting in her wheelchair, flinched at the words, her fragile form shrinking back. Edward's face turned red, his jaw clenched. But instead of standing up for his mother, he stayed silent. My heart dropped. I had seen enough abuse in my life to recognize the patterns. The silence, the coldness, it wasn't just a disagreement, it was an attack. I had been working at the Hawthorne estate long enough to know that no one ever stood up to Valerie, not even Edward, and certainly not his mother. I was just the maid, the one who cleaned up after everyone and stayed out of sight. But that day, something inside me snapped. I had to do something. As I moved past the doorway, I heard Valerie's laughter, mocking Edward's mother. "You really think she's going to get better, Edward? She's just taking up space in this house. Maybe it's time we put her out of her misery." Those words burned through me. I couldn't stand by any longer. Without thinking, I stepped into the room. "You need to leave," I said, my voice steady, but my heart was racing. Valerie turned to look at me, her eyes narrowing with contempt. "Who do you think you are?" she sneered, standing up from her chair and walking toward me. "You're just a maid. You have no say here." Her words stung, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I stood tall, locking eyes with her. Edward remained silent, his gaze dropping to the floor. This wasn't the first time Valerie had shown her true colors, but it was the first time I had been in a position to stop her. I took a deep breath and spoke again, my voice unwavering. "You will not speak to her like that. Not in my presence." Valerie's face twisted with rage. She moved toward me, her hand raised as if to strike me, but I didn't move. I had no authority in this house, no power, no title, but in that moment, I was not afraid. I said, "Leave," I repeated, my words cutting through the tension in the room like a knife. Valerie's hand stopped midair, hovering for a brief second. It was as if time had frozen. She looked at me, then back at Edward, as if seeking some kind of approval, but he said nothing. Finally, she dropped her hand, sneering one last time before turning and storming out of the room, leaving me standing with Edward's mother. The air was thick with silence, but for the first time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with the possibility of something more. Something had shifted, and I could feel it. I never expected the events of that day to come back to me in such vivid detail. After Valerie stormed out of the room, leaving me alone with Edward's mother, the silence between us was deafening. I stood there for a moment, trying to collect myself, the weight of what I had just done settling in. I hadn't planned on intervening like that, but something about the cruelty in Valerie's voice pushed me to act. The tension in the air was palpable. Edward's mother, frail and delicate, sat quietly in her wheelchair, her hands clasped together in her lap, her gaze distant. I could see the pain in her eyes. I wasn't sure if it was from the abuse she had endured, or from the hopelessness of seeing her son so submissive to Valerie's control. I gently walked over to her, kneeling down to her level. "Are you okay?" I asked softly, not wanting to intrude on her privacy but knowing that her silence spoke volumes. She looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and sadness, her lips trembling as she spoke. "I've never been this ashamed of him, dear," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He's a good boy, but he's lost his way, Valerie. She has a hold on him, and he can't see it." I nodded slowly, understanding more than she realized. Edward was a man trapped by his own insecurities, always trying to please Valerie, even at the cost of his own family. I couldn't help but feel pity for him, but at the same time, I was frustrated. He could be so much more if he just stood up for what was right. But for now, it was my responsibility to protect his mother, to ensure she wouldn't suffer in silence any longer. "You don't deserve this," I whispered, placing a hand on her arm. She gave me a sad smile, one filled with sorrow and regret. "No one deserves this," she replied, looking toward the doorway as if waiting for her son to appear and make things right. But Edward didn't come. Instead, the silence in the room deepened, and I could feel the weight of what was to come. As I looked at Edward's mother, a thought crossed my mind. What if I was the one who needed to change things? What if, instead of standing by and watching them suffer, I could be the catalyst for change? It wasn't going to be easy. I didn't have the power or the status to confront Valerie head-on, but I had something else, the truth, and the truth could change everything. I stood up, my decision made. "I'm going to talk to him," I said, more to myself than to her. Edward needed to hear the truth. He needed to understand that his mother wasn't just some burden to be cast aside. She was his mother, the woman who had loved him unconditionally, and he had to fight for her. But as I turned to leave, I saw Edward standing in the doorway, his face a mask of guilt and uncertainty. He had been standing there, listening to our conversation, and I knew that he had heard every word. I wasn't sure what to expect from him, but I wasn't going to back down. "Edward," I said, my voice firm, "it's time to stop letting her control you. It's time to choose who you are." Edward didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, his eyes searching mine as if looking for some sort of validation, some reassurance that he wasn't alone in this. But I couldn't give him that. The only thing I could offer him was the truth, and the truth was that he had to make a choice. He had to decide whether to keep letting Valerie manipulate him, or if he was going to stand up for his family. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and shaky. "I don't know if I can do it," he admitted, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "She has such a hold on me." I could hear the vulnerability in his voice, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. But I knew that sympathy wasn't what he needed right now. He needed strength, and he needed to see that he could stand up for what was right. "You're stronger than you think," I told him, my voice steady. "You have the power to choose, and you have the power to protect the people you love. Don't let her take that away from you." Edward's face softened as he looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. I didn't know if he would listen to me, but I knew that I had done what I could. I had told him the truth. Now it was up to him to decide what he would do with it. I walked away from Edward, my mind racing with thoughts of what had just transpired. I had never seen him so vulnerable, so lost, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of the man he could be if he only found the courage to stand up for what was right. But I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Valerie had a hold on him, and it would take more than just a few words to break that grip. As I walked down the hallway, I could hear the faint sound of Valerie's voice coming from the living room. I paused for a moment, just outside the door, listening to her smooth, convincing tone as she spoke to Edward, trying to manipulate him once again. "Edward, you know I love you," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness. "But your mother, she's a liability. She's going to drag you down, you know that, don't you?" I could almost hear the smile in her voice, the same smile that had likely charmed Edward from the start. It made me sick to my stomach. I had seen enough of this woman's manipulation to last a lifetime. But this time, something was different. This time, Edward had heard the truth, and I could feel the weight of it in the air. I didn't know if he would act on it, but I knew he couldn't ignore it. I continued walking, moving toward the kitchen to find some space to think. I had no idea how things were going to play out, but I knew that the next time I saw Edward, things would be different. He had to change, for his mother's sake, for his own sake, and maybe even for mine. As I entered the kitchen, I was greeted by the smell of freshly brewed coffee. I hadn't realized how much I needed it until I walked in and took in the rich, comforting scent. I poured myself a cup and took a long sip, letting the warmth spread through my chest. The house was quiet, too quiet, and I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It was as though the calm before the storm had arrived, and all I could do now was wait and see how things unfolded. Just as I was about to leave the kitchen, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned to see Edward standing in the doorway, his face still filled with uncertainty. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice shaky but determined. "I've been thinking about what you said." My heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. "I'm listening," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He stepped further into the room, his gaze never leaving mine. "You're right," he began, his words coming slowly, as if he were still trying to find the right ones. "I've let her control me for so long. I've let her manipulate me, and I've been blind to it. But I can't do this anymore." I felt a surge of relief flood through me, but I didn't say anything. I just stood there, letting him speak. I've been so focused on trying to please her, on keeping her happy, that I forgot about my mother. I forgot about the woman who gave me life, who raised me, who loves me unconditionally, and I let her suffer because of it. His voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw the man he truly was: vulnerable, remorseful, and ready to change. "I can't fix everything, but I can start by making things right with her. I can choose her over Valerie. I can choose my family over the lies." I nodded, my heart swelling with pride. This was the Edward I had hoped to see. The man who would stand up for what was right, no matter how difficult it was. "You're doing the right thing," I told him, my voice soft but filled with conviction. "But remember, this isn't just about choosing your mother. It's about choosing yourself. You deserve better than this." Edward's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw a spark of hope in them. It wasn't just about his mother anymore. It was about him taking control of his life and finding his own strength. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice full of gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done without you." I smiled softly. "You would have figured it out," I said, my voice warm. "But I'm glad you didn't have to." Edward left the kitchen, his posture a little straighter, his steps a little firmer. I watched him go, feeling a sense of satisfaction knowing that he was finally making the right choice. But I also knew that the real battle was just beginning. Valerie wasn't going to give up easily, and she wasn't going to let Edward go without a fight. But for the first time, I believed in him, and I believed that he could win this fight. I didn't know what I expected when I stepped into the living room, but I wasn't prepared for the cold silence that greeted me. Edward had left the kitchen with a new resolve, but as I stood in the doorway, watching him walk away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Valerie would not go down without a fight. As if on cue, she appeared from around the corner, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step sharp and deliberate. She looked like she had just stepped out of a magazine, her perfectly styled hair and polished demeanor masking the venom beneath. She paused when she saw me, her eyes narrowing with that familiar look of contempt. "I didn't expect you to be so bold," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "What do you think you're doing here? This isn't your place." I stood my ground, not flinching at her words. "I'm just here to make sure you understand something," I said, my voice steady. "Edward is finally seeing the truth. You don't control him anymore." Valerie's eyes flashed with anger, but she didn't immediately respond. She took a step forward, closing the distance between us, and for a moment, I thought she might strike me, but I didn't move. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," she hissed, her face inches from mine. "Edward belongs to me. I've been with him through everything. You think he's going to choose you over me? Over what we have?" I met her gaze, unwavering. "I'm not asking him to choose me. I'm asking him to choose what's right." Valerie scoffed, stepping back. "What's right?" she sneered. "What's right is keeping things the way they are. You're just a maid, and I'm his fiancée. You don't belong here, and you never will." Her words hit me harder than I cared to admit. But I refused to let her see any weakness. "Maybe you don't understand," I said, my voice firm, "but Edward has a choice now, and I'm not going to let you manipulate him any longer." She laughed, a cold, mocking sound that echoed through the room. "You think you can change him? You think you have that kind of power?" she said, crossing her arms. "You're just a servant, and you always will be." I could feel the sting of her words, but I pushed it down. "I'm not here to fight with you," I said, taking a deep breath. "I'm here because someone needs to make sure Edward knows what love actually looks like, and it's not what you've been showing him." Valerie's face darkened, and for a moment, I thought she might lunge at me, but then she just stood there, seething. "You're wasting your time," she spat. "Edward will never leave me. He doesn't need you or anyone else telling him what to do." But I wasn't so sure. Edward had left the kitchen with a new sense of purpose, and I could see the change in him. He was starting to understand the truth, what love really meant, And it wasn't about manipulation or control. It was about respect, about standing up for the people you care about. "We'll see about that," I said quietly, turning to leave. I didn't need to say anything more. I knew that the real battle was just beginning. Valerie wasn't going to give up easily, and neither was I. But this time, Edward had made a choice. And no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't change that. As I walked back toward the kitchen, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. This wasn't just about Edward's mother anymore. This was about Edward finally seeing the truth and finding the strength to fight for it. And no one, certainly not Valerie, could take that away from him. I didn't hear from Edward for the rest of the night. It wasn't until the next morning that I saw him again. He looked different, more confident. But there was still a shadow of uncertainty in his eyes. I was standing by the kitchen counter when I heard the door open, and there he was, walking in with his head held a little higher, his posture a little straighter. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there for a moment, looking like he was still processing everything. Finally, he spoke. "I told her I couldn't do this anymore," Edward said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "I told Valerie I couldn't marry her. I couldn't live with the lies anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay." My heart skipped a beat. It was the moment I had been waiting for, but I didn't know how to react. A part of me wanted to rush over to him, to tell him how proud I was. But another part of me was nervous. Was he really ready to let go of everything? "You did the right thing," I said softly, my voice steady, but filled with emotion. Edward gave me a small nod, then took a deep breath, his gaze turning toward the floor. "It wasn't easy," he admitted, his voice cracking slightly. She tried to manipulate me one last time. She said I was making the biggest mistake of my life, that I was going to lose everything. She told me that my family wouldn't accept me anymore, that they would never forgive me for breaking off the engagement. I almost believed her. He paused, looking up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and fear. "But then I thought about what you said, about doing what's right, about choosing the people who matter." I could feel the weight of his words. He wasn't just talking about his fiancée anymore, he was talking about his own life, about the choices he was making for himself, and about the courage it took to change everything. "It wasn't easy for me either," I said, stepping closer to him. "But sometimes, doing the right thing is the hardest thing. It's about standing up for yourself, for what you believe in, even when it feels like the whole world is telling you not to." He smiled then, a small but genuine smile, and it made my heart flutter. "I can't believe I let her control me for so long," he said, shaking his head. "I thought I had to be with her, that I had to make everyone happy, but now I see how wrong I was. I've hurt my family, my mother. I've let her down for years, all because I was too afraid to stand up to Valerie." I reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "It's never too late to make things right," I said, my voice soft but firm. "You've already started. Now you just have to keep going." He looked at me then, really looked at me, like he was seeing me for the first time, and in that moment, I saw something in his eyes, something I hadn't seen before. Hope. It was like a light had finally clicked on inside him, and he wasn't afraid anymore. He was ready to fight for what mattered. He was ready to fight for his mother, for himself, and for the truth. "I'm going to make things right with my mom," he said, his voice stronger now. "I'm going to fix the damage I've done, and I'm going to prove that I'm not the man I was before. I'm going to be better." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. "I know you will," I said, my voice filled with pride. "And I'll be here, every step of the way." Edward nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. For the first time, I saw him as the man he was meant to be, not the man he had been. He wasn't perfect, but he was ready to be better, and that was all that mattered. As he turned to leave, he stopped at the door, glancing back at me. "Thank you," he said softly, "for showing me the way, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." My heart swelled in my chest. "You're welcome," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Now go and show your mother how much you love her. She needs you, Edward, and so do you." With one last glance, he walked out of the kitchen, his steps confident and sure. I knew this was just the beginning of a long road ahead. But for the first time, I believed that Edward was on the right path. He was no longer under Valerie's control. He was free, and he was finally ready to make things right. I stood there in the kitchen for what seemed like hours, waiting for Edward to come back. The house felt strangely quiet, the kind of silence that weighed heavily on your chest. I had watched him walk out, his steps sure, and for the first time, I saw the man he could truly be, the one who wasn't afraid to make the tough choices. I couldn't help but feel a mixture of pride and uncertainty. Was he really ready to face Valerie? Was he truly going to stand by his decision? Or would he go back to his old ways? The doorbell rang, cutting through my thoughts like a sharp jolt. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before walking toward the door. When I opened it, I found Edward standing there, his face drawn but determined. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, his eyes searching for something. For reassurance? For approval? I didn't know, but I could see the tension in his posture, like he was gearing up for something big. "I told her," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. "I told Valerie I was done. It's over. I'm not going back." A wave of relief washed over me, but I stayed calm, not wanting to overwhelm him. "You did the right thing," I said, my voice steady but warm. "And I'm proud of you." Edward nodded, but his gaze dropped to the floor. He looked like he was still processing everything. I could feel his uncertainty. "It's not just about Valerie," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I thought I was making the right choice for so long, but I was just trying to please her. I've been so blind to everything else. My mom, she needed me, and I've let her down. I've let everyone down." I could hear the guilt in his voice, the weight of it pressing down on him. I stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're here now," I said, my voice firm. "That's all that matters. You can't change the past, but you can start making it right now. And that's what you're doing." Edward looked up at me then, his eyes wide with something new, hope, maybe, or perhaps a realization that he still had the power to change his future. "I don't know where to start," he admitted, his voice hesitant. "How do I even begin to make it up to her? How do I fix all of this?" I smiled softly, squeezing his shoulder. "You start by being there. For your mom, for yourself. You don't have to fix everything at once, but showing up and being the person she needs, that's the first step." He nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of my words. I could see the resolve starting to form in his eyes, a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. "I'm going to talk to her," he said, determination in his voice now. "I'm going to make it right. I have to. She deserves that." I didn't doubt him. I could feel it in the way he spoke. He wasn't just talking about his mother. He was talking about himself, about finding the strength to confront the mistakes he had made and take responsibility. "I'll be here," I said, my voice steady. Every step of the way, Edward gave me a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't even believe in myself." My heart warmed at his words. "You always had it in you," I said, my voice soft but filled with conviction. "You just needed to see it." He stood there for a moment longer, and then, with a deep breath, he turned and walked away. As I watched him go, I couldn't help but feel proud of the man he was becoming, proud of the choices he was finally making. It wasn't going to be easy for him. Valerie wasn't going to let go without a fight. But I knew, deep down, that this was his turning point. This was the moment when he chose to step into his own power, to take responsibility for his actions, and to fight for what mattered most. And I knew, as I stood there in that quiet kitchen, that he wasn't alone. I would be with him every step of the way. I had no idea how far Edward was willing to go until I saw the fire in his eyes that morning. After his conversation with me in the kitchen, after he decided to confront his own truth, there was a shift in him, something more than just resolve. There was determination. I watched him leave that morning, dressed in his best suit, heading toward his mother's room, and I knew in that moment that there was no going back. The door closed softly behind him, but the weight of what was about to happen filled the house with a tension I could feel deep in my bones. A few minutes later, I heard the soft sound of voices, Edward's deep and steady, his mother's softer, full of hesitation and uncertainty. I couldn't make out the words, but I could feel the warmth in the air. He was talking to her, really talking to her. No longer just a son wrapped up in guilt or the shadow of Valerie's control. He was a man, standing on his own, ready to be the person she always needed him to be. It wasn't easy for either of them. I could tell from the way the conversation shifted, from the pauses and the quiet, from the things left unsaid, but I didn't need to hear every word. I knew what was happening. They were reconnecting. After what felt like hours, the door opened. Edward stepped out first. His expression softened, his eyes tired, but filled with a quiet peace. His mother followed shortly behind him, her frail hand resting gently on his arm, her steps slow but more certain than I had seen in years. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic speeches, but there was something in the way they looked at each other, something that spoke volumes. I could see the forgiveness in her eyes. I could see the relief in his. The weight that had hung between them for so long was starting to lift. Edward's eyes met mine as he walked toward me, his steps steady, but I could see the weariness in his face. He didn't say anything at first, but his silence spoke louder than words ever could. He didn't need to say anything. He had done it. He had finally chosen his family. He had chosen the truth. I stepped forward to meet him, my heart full. "How did it go?" I asked softly, afraid to break the stillness, afraid that if I spoke too loudly, the moment might shatter. He smiled, but it was a different smile from before. It wasn't one full of doubt or hesitation. It was one of peace, of acceptance. "It's a start," he said, his voice low but sure. "She forgives me, and I think I can finally forgive myself." I felt a surge of pride swell inside me. This was the man I had always known was inside him, the one who could rise above the shadows of his past and be who he was meant to be. "You did the right thing," I said quietly, my voice full of pride. "It's not about being perfect. It's about being real. You showed her who you really are." He nodded, and then, for the first time since this all started, he reached out and took my hand. The gesture was small, but it meant more than words ever could. It was the sign that he was ready to move forward, to face whatever came next with the strength and clarity he had found. We didn't need to say anything else. We stood there for a moment, in that quiet, shared understanding. Then Edward turned toward his mother, who was sitting back down, a peaceful expression on her face. "Mom," he said, his voice filled with a tenderness I hadn't heard before. "I'll be here, I promise. No more hiding, no more running away. I'll be the son you deserve." She smiled at him, her eyes shining with tears of relief, but also of hope. "I know you will," she whispered. As I watched them, I realized how much they had both changed. Edward had taken his first steps toward healing, not just for himself, but for the people he loved. And for the first time in a long time, I believed that they both had the strength to face the future, whatever it held. Valerie, I knew, wasn't going to give up easily. But Edward had something now that he hadn't had before, the truth. And the truth was a force that no one could fight against. As he walked back toward me, I saw a man reborn. This wasn't the same Edward who had been unsure, manipulated, and lost in his guilt. This was someone stronger. This was someone ready to fight for what was right, and that gave me a sense of hope I hadn't felt in years. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but filled with emotion. "For everything." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "You did all the work. I just helped you find your way." As we stood there, hand in hand, I knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where Edward would no longer be a victim of the past, but a man who would shape his own future, and no one, certainly not Valerie, could take that from him. I woke up the next morning to the sound of birds chirping outside the window, the soft rays of the sun creeping in through the blinds. The world felt quieter, almost like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. I wasn't sure if it was just my own anticipation, or if the house itself was waiting for Edward to take the next step. I could feel the change in the air, the subtle shift in everything that had been building up for weeks. But even though I felt this calm, I knew deep down that this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. As I made my way downstairs, I could hear the sound of voices in the kitchen. Edward and his mother were talking, but it wasn't the tense conversation I had overheard before. This time, it was different. It was quieter, more peaceful. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them. Edward's mother was smiling softly, her frail hand resting gently on his. He looked different. The man I saw now wasn't the same one I had met months ago, the one trapped in guilt and uncertainty. He had a calmness about him, a peace that seemed to radiate from within. I felt a strange warmth in my chest as I watched them. They were finally starting to heal, to rebuild their relationship. I stepped into the kitchen, and both of them looked up. Edward's eyes met mine, and for a moment, he didn't say anything. There was just this look between us, an unspoken understanding, before he finally spoke. "I talked to her," he said, his voice steady. "I told Valerie that I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I can't live a lie. I'm done with her manipulation." There was a weight to his words, a finality. I could hear the relief in his voice, but there was also a sense of guilt, of knowing that he had let things go on for far too long. His mother, who had been silently watching the conversation, spoke softly. "I'm proud of you, Edward. You did what you needed to do." Her voice was gentle, but I could hear the pride in it. Edward gave a small nod, his eyes flickering to the floor for a moment, before looking back at her. "I just wish I had done it sooner," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I've hurt so many people, including you. I let my own fears and insecurities get in the way of what really mattered." His mother squeezed his hand gently. "You can't change the past, my son, but you've made the choice to be better, and that's all I've ever wanted for you." It was the first time I had seen Edward really hear those words. The first time I saw him believe them. It was as though all the years of guilt and uncertainty were finally starting to fade away. I could see the man he had the potential to be, standing right in front of me, and as much as I wanted to rush over and tell him how proud I was, I knew that this moment was his. He needed to fully absorb the weight of what he had done and what it meant for his future. I quietly stepped back, giving them space. I wasn't part of this conversation, not in the way his mother was. This was their moment to heal, and I wasn't going to interrupt it. I watched as Edward stood up, his gaze firm but filled with a vulnerability that was new. He turned toward me then, his face a little softer than before. "I'm going to do better," he said, his voice quieter now. "I'm going to make things right, for my mother, for myself, and for you." I didn't know what to say. I hadn't expected him to say anything like that, but as I looked at him, I realized that this wasn't about me. This was about him finally finding his own path. He didn't need anyone else to save him anymore. He had saved himself, and that was the most powerful thing he could do. "I know you will," I said simply, my voice soft, but filled with all the conviction I felt. Edward smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes. It wasn't forced or guarded. It was genuine. I hadn't seen him smile like that in so long. It was like a burden had been lifted, and the weight of the world wasn't sitting on his shoulders anymore. "Thank you," he said, his voice quieter now, but still full of meaning, "for believing in me, for standing by me, even when I couldn't see it." I didn't need to answer him. The gratitude in his eyes was enough. I had always believed in him, but now, he was starting to believe in himself. He was starting to see that he could be the man he wanted to be, not just for others, but for himself. As I watched him walk back to his mother, the air in the room felt lighter, the tension that had once filled every corner of the house finally dissipating. There would be challenges ahead, I knew that. Valerie wasn't going to let go so easily, but Edward had made his choice. And I knew that, no matter what, he would be ready for whatever came next. I knew that the moment Edward had taken the step to stand up to Valerie, the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were going to be consequences, and I could feel the tension building. Valerie wasn't the type of woman to back down quietly. She had controlled Edward for too long, and now that he had made the decision to free himself from her grasp, I knew she wasn't going to just let him go. The phone call came later that afternoon. The sound of the ring echoed through the house, loud and insistent. I knew it was coming. It had to be. I didn't even need to check the caller ID to know it was Valerie. I didn't want to pick it up, but I knew I had to. This was it. This was the moment where everything would start to unravel. I answered, and sure enough, her voice crackled through the phone, dripping with bitterness. "So, he finally grew a spine," she sneered. "How cute. But it won't change anything. He's mine, and I'll make sure he understands that." Her words were venomous, cold, and calculated. I could hear the anger in her voice, but beneath that, I could also hear the desperation. She knew that she was losing control. "You really think he's going to leave me?" she continued, laughing bitterly. "He'll come crawling back, just like he always does. And when he does, you won't be there to protect him anymore." "You're wrong," I said calmly, my voice steady despite the tension. "He's done. He's made his choice, and this time, there's no going back." "You think you've won? You think you've saved him?" Valerie's voice was sharp, like a knife cutting through the air. "You're nothing but a maid. What do you know about love? About loyalty? You can't give him what he needs. He's going to regret this. He'll come back to me." I took a deep breath, standing firm, not giving an inch to her words. "No, Valerie, this is different. He's different. You've lost him. He's choosing his family, and he's choosing what's right. You can't manipulate him anymore." The line was silent for a moment, and I knew she was processing what I had said. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and full of cold fury. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're nothing, just like him. He doesn't deserve you. You don't belong in his life. You're just a distraction." Her words were meant to hurt, to drive a wedge between us, but they didn't. I had seen the strength in Edward that she never could. He was finally seeing the truth, and that truth couldn't be erased by her manipulation. "I don't need to be anything in his life," I said softly, "but he's better off without you, and I'll make sure he knows that." The line went dead. I stood there for a moment, the weight of the conversation sinking in. I had no illusions. I knew Valerie wasn't done. She wouldn't go down without a fight. But I also knew that Edward was no longer the man she could control. That much had changed. He had made his choice, and nothing she did could take that from him. The real battle was just beginning. Edward wasn't going to make it through this unscathed, and I knew that. But I also knew that he wasn't alone. He had finally broken free from the chains that had bound him for so long. He had taken the first step toward his own freedom, and that meant more than anything. Later that evening, I found him sitting alone in the living room, his head in his hands. I walked over to him, silently sitting beside him. He didn't say anything at first. I could see the exhaustion in his face, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on him. "She's not going to stop, is she?" he said quietly, his voice filled with defeat. "No," I replied, my voice steady. "But you're stronger now. You've made your choice, and that's what matters." Edward looked at me then, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "I just don't know if I can keep fighting," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I don't know if I have the strength to keep going." I put my hand on his shoulder, giving him a reassuring squeeze. "You don't have to do it alone," I said softly. "You have people who care about you. You have me, and I'll be here to help you, every step of the way." He nodded slowly, the weight in his eyes easing just a little. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but filled with sincerity, "for believing in me. And for the first time in a long time, I believed in him too. I believed that no matter how hard it got, Edward would fight for what was right. And this time, he wasn't alone. I could feel the weight of the situation the moment I saw Edward pacing in the living room, his brow furrowed in thought, his fingers running through his hair as he tried to process everything. He had taken a stand. He had made his choice. But the reality of it all was starting to sink in. Valerie wasn't just going to disappear. He knew that. And I knew it too. This wasn't going to be a smooth ride for either of them. The phone call came shortly after. And when I saw the name on the screen, I already knew what it was. It was Valerie. It had to be. I hesitated for just a second before answering, the tension in the air making it hard to breathe. So, the little boy finally grew up. Valerie's voice was laced with venom, sharp and bitter. "You really think you've won? You think you can just walk away from me like this?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, knowing I had to be calm in the face of her manipulation. "It's over, Valerie," I said, my voice steady. "Edward has made his decision, and there's no going back. You can't control him anymore." There was a long pause, and for a moment, I thought she might hang up. But then her voice came through again, even colder than before. "You think you've taken something from me? You think you've saved him?" She laughed, a hollow, humorless sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "He's mine, and you'll see. He always comes back to me. You don't know him like I do. I felt a rush of anger, but I pushed it down, focusing on the truth instead. You don't know him at all, I replied. Not the real him. You've kept him in the dark for so long, Valerie. You've manipulated him, controlled him, and for the first time, he's seen through it. He's finally free, and there's nothing you can do about it. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, and then silence. I could almost hear her calculating her next move. You don't think this is over, do you? She said finally, her voice filled with barely contained fury. You've made him think he's in control, but I've got something you don't. I've got history. I've got the truth. The mention of the truth hit me harder than I expected. What do you mean? I asked, my voice careful. She laughed again, but this time, there was something darker in it. You really think he's going to forgive you? You think he's going to stand by you when he finds out what you've been hiding? My pulse quickened, but I didn't let her see it. What are you talking about? I demanded. Valerie was quiet for a moment, the silence almost suffocating. Then she spoke, her words slow and deliberate. I know what you've been hiding, the truth about your past. You think he'll still trust you when he knows the real reason you're here? I felt the floor shift beneath me. My mind raced, trying to keep up with what she was saying. The truth? The real reason? What are you trying to do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Valerie's voice was like a snake, curling through the phone. I'm just telling you this for your own good, she said sweetly. Edward deserves to know everything. The truth is always better than lies. The threat in her words was unmistakable, and I could feel the fear creeping in. But I couldn't show it. I couldn't let her win. You're wrong, I said firmly. He knows the truth. And he's chosen it. Whatever you think you can use against us, it won't matter. He's not going to leave me. Not this time. The silence on the other end stretched for a long time, and for a moment, I thought she might hang up. But then she spoke, her voice colder than ever. We'll see about that, she said, before hanging up. I stood there, the phone still pressed to my ear, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew Valerie wasn't done, that she was going to fight until the very end. But I also knew something else. Edward had made his choice. He had chosen to fight for what was right, for his family, and for himself, and nothing Valerie did could change that. I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, and then I turned toward the living room, ready to face whatever came next. When Edward looked up from his pacing, his eyes met mine, and I could see the uncertainty still lingering there. She called, didn't she? He asked quietly, his voice full of resignation. I nodded. Yeah, I said, my voice calm but steady. But it's over, Edward. She can't control you anymore. You've made your choice. He looked at me for a long time, like he was trying to figure out if he could truly believe it. Finally, he took a deep breath and nodded. You're right, he said softly. It's over. And in that moment, I saw it the first real step forward. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be more battles to come, but Edward was finally free. And for the first time in a long time, I believed he would fight for his freedom, no matter what Valerie tried to throw at him. I woke up the next morning to a silence that felt different still, yet filled with the potential for something new. The house, once thick with tension and secrets, now felt like it was holding its breath. Edward had made his choice. The line had been drawn. Valerie's hold on him was finally broken, but I knew that it didn't mean the end of the battle. It meant a new beginning. I found him sitting by the window in the living room, staring out into the distance, his fingers loosely gripping a mug of coffee. The quiet strength I had seen in him the day before was still there, but so was the weight of what he had just done. This was no easy road. I approached him slowly, not wanting to interrupt his thoughts, but when he saw me, his face softened. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. His eyes told me everything. I don't think I fully realized what I was letting go of, Edward finally said, his voice quiet, like he was talking to himself more than anyone else. I spent so long trying to keep the peace, trying to make everyone happy, that I forgot about what I needed, what I wanted, what's right. I nodded, sitting down next to him. It's not easy, Edward, letting go of the past, especially when you've been tangled in it for so long, but you've made the right choice, and you're not alone. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Vulnerability, yes, but also hope. "I know," he said, a small but genuine smile spreading across his face. "It feels different now. I feel free." His words were soft, almost tentative, like he was still testing the feeling of freedom. "And that's just the beginning," I said gently. "It's not going to be easy, but you're strong enough to face whatever comes next." Edward's smile faded slightly, his gaze drifting back to the window. "I know Valerie won't stop. She'll fight for control, fight to keep me in her grasp, and I don't know how much longer I can hold my ground." I reached over, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "You've already made it this far. You've already chosen what's right. That's more than half the battle. The rest, we'll face it together. You're not alone." He turned to look at me, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of trust in his eyes. "I couldn't have done this without you," he admitted, his voice steady but full of sincerity. "You've believed in me, even when I couldn't believe in myself. I can't thank you enough for that." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. "You've always had the strength inside you, Edward. You just needed to see it. And now, you do." He stood up, his movements slower than usual, but more deliberate. There was a newfound confidence in his posture, a quiet determination that wasn't there before. "I'm going to fix things with my mom," he said, his voice firm. "I'm going to be the son she deserves, and I'll make sure she knows that. I can't change the past, but I can show her that I'm here now, that I'm ready to be the man she always believed I could be." The words were more than just promises. They were a commitment, a decision to move forward, to take control of his life and shape it into something better. "You'll do it," I said softly. "I know you will, and no matter what happens next, you'll be doing it for the right reasons." Edward looked at me one last time before heading toward the door. His footsteps were heavier now, not with doubt, but with purpose. "Thank you," he said over his shoulder, his voice quieter, but full of meaning. "For everything." And just like that, he was gone. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence fill the room. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning of a new chapter for Edward, for his mother, and for me. The road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges, but I believed in him. And I believed in the power of his decision. No one, not even Valerie, could take that away from him. He was free, and for the first time in a long time, I truly felt like we were all free. I didn't know what to expect when Edward came back into the house that evening, but as soon as I saw him, I knew something had changed. He wasn't the man who had left just a few hours ago. There was a strength in his posture, a calmness in his demeanor that hadn't been there before. I could see it in the way he walked, in the way he held himself. He was no longer carrying the weight of the past on his shoulders. He had made his choice, and he was ready to face whatever came next. "It's done," Edward said quietly, his voice filled with determination. "I spoke to her. I told Valerie that I'm done, that it's over. I'm not going back to that life, to that woman, to the lies. I've made my choice." I could see the relief in his eyes, but there was something else too. There was no regret, no uncertainty. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when Edward truly took control of his own life. "I'm proud of you," I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "You've done something that most people can't. You've chosen to live for yourself, not for anyone else's expectations. That takes real strength." Edward looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the weight of everything that had happened, the guilt, the fear, the uncertainty, fall away from him. "It wasn't easy," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "But it was the right thing to do. I know that now." He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, as if the words he was about to say were the hardest part. "I don't know if I can ever make up for what I've done, for how I've hurt people, my mom especially." I reached out, placing a hand on his arm, grounding him in the moment. "You can't change the past, Edward," I said softly, "but you've already taken the first step toward making things right, and that's enough." Edward nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "I need to show her that I'm here now, that I'm not going to make the same mistakes, that I'm going to be the son she always deserved." His voice faltered slightly, but the conviction was still there. "And I need to prove to myself that I'm not the man I was." I smiled, squeezing his arm gently. You've already proven that. Every step you've taken from the moment you made the decision to leave Valerie behind has shown that you're not that man anymore." He stood up, his eyes meeting mine with a clarity I hadn't seen before. "I'm going to make it right with her," he said, his voice stronger now. "I'm going to fight for my family, for what's real, and I'm going to make sure she knows that." I watched him walk toward the door, his movements more sure now, like he was ready to face whatever came next. "I'll be here," I called after him, my voice steady but full of warmth, every step of the way. Edward didn't say anything at first, but then he stopped, turning back to look at me. There was a soft smile on his face, a smile that was full of gratitude, but also something more, something deeper. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done this without you." I didn't need to say anything in response. The smile I gave him was all he needed to know. I had always believed in him, and now, he was finally believing in himself. As he left the house to face his mother, I knew that this wasn't the end of the story. The battle with Valerie was far from over, but Edward had taken the first step in reclaiming his life, and that was something Valerie couldn't take away from him. She could fight, she could manipulate, but she couldn't break him. Not anymore. I stood by the door, watching him go, feeling a sense of pride swell inside me. This was only the beginning. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be real, and that was something neither Valerie nor anyone else could ever take away. The next few days passed in a blur of quiet conversations, small victories, and the slow but steady healing of wounds that had been left open for far too long. Edward didn't return to the life he had known, and for the first time in a long time, he was truly living on his own terms. The battle with Valerie had not ended, but something had changed. He had taken control, and that was something no one could take from him. I watched as he went to his mother's room again, this time with a calm determination. The conversation was quieter than before, but I could tell it was more meaningful. This was the beginning of their journey to heal, to rebuild what had been broken by years of manipulation and guilt. It was not going to be an easy road, but they were on it together, and that was enough. As I sat in the living room, the sound of their voices drifting in from the other room, I felt a quiet sense of pride. Not for what I had done, no, that wasn't it. But for Edward, for the strength he had shown in finally seeing the truth that had been right in front of him all along. He was no longer bound by the past, by the chains of Valerie's control. He was free, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the man I always knew he could be. Strong, capable, and full of hope. I smiled to myself as I thought about the journey he had just begun. There was no going back for him now, and that was the most powerful thing he could have done. The phone call came a few hours later, and I saw Edward's name on the caller ID. My heart skipped a beat, but I knew it wasn't something bad. I answered, my voice calm but full of anticipation. "Hey," I said, a smile creeping onto my face. "How's it going?" Edward's voice came through the line, calm but with an edge of something else, relief. "Maybe. I just wanted to let you know," he said, his words slow but sure, "that I've talked to her, Valerie. It's over." I felt the weight of those words, and I knew that they meant more than just a breakup. They meant that Edward had finally taken control of his life. "I'm proud of you," I said quietly, my voice steady but full of emotion. "You've made the right choice. Now, it's about what happens next." "Yeah," he replied, his voice a little stronger now. "It's just the beginning, right?" I could hear the smile in his voice, the realization that the journey ahead was his to shape. "Exactly," I said, my heart full. "You've got this. And you know, I'm here for you, no matter what." He was silent for a moment, and then he spoke, his voice soft but filled with gratitude. "I don't think I could have done it without you. Thank you, for everything." My heart swelled. "You don't need to thank me," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You did this. You made the choice, and that's everything." We said our goodbyes, and I knew that while the road ahead wouldn't be easy, it would be real. Edward had chosen his own path. No longer a victim of the past, he was now the architect of his future, and that was all that mattered. A week passed, and I saw Edward again. This time, he was sitting across from me, his posture more relaxed, his smile more genuine. There was something different in his eyes. It wasn't just relief, it was pride. The pride of someone who had faced his fears, who had made the hard choices, and who had finally taken control. "I don't know what happens next," he said, looking at me with a mixture of uncertainty and hope. "But I know one thing for sure. I'm done with the past. I'm done being afraid. I'm ready for whatever comes next." And with those words, I knew that he was finally free. Free of Valerie, free of the guilt, and free to live his life the way he always deserved to. The rest of his life was ahead of him, and it was up to him to write his own story now. I smiled at him, knowing that no matter what happened, he had already won. The strength he had found, the man he had become, no one could take that from him, not even Valerie, and that was the most beautiful thing of all. In this gripping tale of strength, growth, and breaking free from control, Edward faces a life-changing decision that will alter everything he thought he knew about himself. For years, he had been trapped in a toxic relationship, manipulated by Valerie, a woman who had controlled every aspect of his life. But when Edward finally makes the brave choice to stand up for himself, he embarks on a journey of self-discovery and empowerment. His story is one of triumph over adversity, where Edward fights not just for his own freedom, but for the respect and love of his family. As he confronts his past, Edward learns that true strength comes from within, and the real battle is about finding the courage to live authentically. This powerful Black story reveals the transformative power of choosing what is right, even when the path ahead seems uncertain. With support from those who believe in him, Edward faces the challenges ahead with a new sense of purpose, determined to never go back to the life he left behind. This Black story reminds us that the hardest decisions are often the most rewarding, and that freedom is something no one can take away. As Edward steps into his new life, he embraces the freedom to choose his future and shows that no one, not even those who once held him back, can control his destiny. Through this journey, we see the resilience of the human spirit, proving that it's never too late to change, to fight for what's right, and to reclaim the life that's always been waiting. This Black story stands as a testament to overcoming manipulation, finding strength in the face of fear, and living a life free from the past. Don't miss out on this incredible journey of self-liberation, as Edward's transformation inspires everyone who has ever felt trapped by their circumstances. The power of this Black story is not just in its message, but in its ability to touch hearts and inspire change.